Good morning. My name is Bobby Zirkin, and I am a former state senator from Baltimore County here on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association as we continue to connect with candidates for office. Today, we are interviewing candidates for governor and lieutenant governor here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. As we approach the July primary election, the State Bar remains committed to our members and to the public at large to connect in a nonpartisan forum about the issues that matter to the public and specifically to the legal profession. MSBA has appreciated the positive relationship we have had with the executive branch over the years, and we hope to continue working together on important issues as we have in the past. Please visit our website, msba.org/connect with the candidates to view all of our candidate conversations. And this morning, we are honored to have Justinian Dispenza, who is a candidate for lieutenant governor from his home. He is the lieutenant governor candidate for Jerome Siegel, who is running in the Democratic primary. Mr. Dispenza, thank you so much for being here and joining the MSBA.
Thank you, Bobby, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. If you could just introduce yourself, maybe talk about a little bit about your background, why you're running, and the experiences that you believe have prepared you to be Maryland's next lieutenant governor.
Absolutely. So hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'm Justinian Dispenza. I'm running with Jerome Siegel for governor and lieutenant governor here in Maryland. Jerome is the oldest candidate running on it's a pretty wide field, and I'm the youngest candidate running. I'm 32 years old. So what I lack for in experience, I make for in ambition and an interest to learn. So I spent most of my 20s doing environmental documentary work abroad, 25 countries before I turned 25. And I got to see firsthand how a lot of different governments work, things that work, things that don't work, and really just a wide variety of human experiences. And so when I moved back to the United States in 2017, I actually joined the Park, Tree, and Recreation Committee for my town as the chairman, and started focusing on administering and getting grants for environmental things, moving away from plastics, single-use plastics, solar panels, electric charging stations, beautification projects, working with the local school on composting and environmental work. But I wasn't making the decisions. I was asking for permission from the council. So I ran for town council and have been on the council of Galena for about a year. And I am on the Eastern Shore, in Kent County, which is the least populated county in all of Maryland. So I have a different perspective than a lot of other lieutenant governor candidates who've been in Baltimore and Montgomery County. I live on the Eastern Shore. I have chickens and bees and a small sort of educational demonstration homestead farm. But really why I'm running is to try and move the conversation about what the future of Maryland is towards sustainability. On the Eastern Shore, we have mostly come to terms with the fact that the sea level is rising. I mean, we're having nuisance flooding and all of these things where people are avoiding saying climate change. But if you look at the projections from the state and federal governments, we'll be losing a lot of our land and a lot of our frontline communities to climate change in the future. And so I'm running not only to move sort of society more towards sustainability and the better work-life balance. My running mate's really focused on sort of finding time for yourself, as the pandemic showed. And Bobby, we can get into this more in a little bit. But for me, it's climate change, because no issue on planet Earth matters if the planet is destabilized. So that's my big passion, but all of Maryland is important to me.
All right. Well, thank you. And we will talk a little bit about the climate change bill that the legislature passed, as well as maybe some other environmental issues. Oh, I do want to switch to an issue that has been kind of plaguing the state and actually the country, and that's the issue of gun violence. Obviously, there have been high-profile mass shootings around the country, here in our state. In the city of Baltimore, it looks like you're going to have as many as 350 murders this year, which would set a record on top of records in the past. So let me just open it up to you first. Specifically, what would your administration do to tackle the increasing violence in our streets and the increasing crime across Maryland?
So one of the scariest things about the United States is if you look at violent statistics for developed countries, the US as a whole is a pretty violent country towards citizen to citizen violence. And so this is an issue that's something that we need to really focus in on and learn how people get to the point where they think that this is the only option in their life, or this is the best way to articulate what they're angry about. Because they're taking it out on innocent lives, they're taking it out on children. So I think the federal law that was just recently passed is great. There's also, I believe it's called Jamie's Law here in Maryland, that has made it to the state house but is not passed yet. We would also focus on laws that essentially hold people responsible. If you have a gun that's in the house that's unlocked, that's not in the safe, where the ammunition is in it, and if somebody takes that gun to cause violence, you'll be held responsible. There's no reason for someone who actually is, as they say, a responsible gun owner to keep a gun in their house irresponsibly. It doesn't make sense. I am a progressive. I also am a gun owner. Everything is locked. Everything is trader locked. Everything is separated from its ammunition. There's no reason that these things should be happening or these kids should be getting guns from their parents to go and shoot up the school. One thing I think too for Baltimore is desperate people do desperate things. And so focusing on more social programs. If you go to our website, siegelforgovernor.org, you'll see our living wage policy matrix, which has a variety of policies focused on housing, focused on education, focused on job, both in terms of opportunities and satisfaction. So people will contribute in a positive way to society where crime doesn't, because the risk doesn't outweigh the rewards anymore.
So let me ask you this. So some of the longer term solutions that you were just discussing, let me focus a little bit more on the short term and see what your thoughts are on it. So for example,
Yeah.
what would your administration do, for example, on the issue of parole and probation reform?
So that was actually the first forum that I did as lieutenant governor, and I didn't know much about it. And I think one of the hardest parts is when you come out of the prison system or the jail system, you're going back to the same situations. And a lot of these sort of halfway house programs that we have are a great start, but the people you're around are the people who will bring you back into the lifestyle that you were living before. So I think we need better funding for transition programs. So when people get out of jail or prison with their phone call and their check or their cash, they don't just go right back to the same situations. And it's happened with my cousins personally, where they've been in and out of prison multiple times, and they just keep going back to the same people in the same situation. So we as a state need to provide better opportunities that are not only outside of that situation, but maybe outside of the community where they were doing these activities. So you have separation from your past and your present.
One of the biggest criminal justice reforms, perhaps in the country, certainly in the state of Maryland's history, was the Justice Reinvestment Act, which was done in a bipartisan fashion a few years ago. Hale certainly goes significantly further than anything the federal government has done, and further than what most states have done. What, if anything, within the Justice Reinvestment Act do you think went too far or didn't go far enough?
I have not looked into the Justice Reinvestment Act yet, so I cannot speak to that.
Okay. And I mean, one of the areas within the Justice Reinvestment Act had to do with sentence reform. And so I guess the question is, there's been a lot of discussion about sentence reform. Are criminals are violent and criminals that have committed multiple violent offenses getting the appropriate sentences before they end up back out on the street in parole and probation? Question is it, there's been some allegation that's essentially a revolving door for people who are incredibly violent. And so I guess, what are your thoughts about that? And how is it that Maryland law can reflect, if you think that's the case, how is it that Maryland law should reflect what we should be doing about that issue?
This is one interesting thing, specifically talking to the Bar Association, as the lawyers and the attorneys and people who are actually involved in this have a chance to have bigger influence. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an environmentalist and a filmmaker. So taking advice from organizations like yours on how to move forward is great. But personally, there are people who will continue to make the same choice, given the same opportunity, knowing the risks again and again and again. It's a tale of two cities. I have one cousin who's been in and out of prison and now has a left and a wife who's worked his way through it. And the other one has been in and out 9 times, I believe, something like that. He doesn't come to Christmas anymore, right? Because he's going to steal something, or you have to be strong on certain issues where someone has, I know there's the 3 strikes you're out situation that has been thrown around. But you have to be realistic. You can try and reform, but if somebody doesn't want to change or is unwilling or has mental health issues that cause them to not be able to get past that sort of thinking, you have to be able to find a way to keep them out of civil society and keep other people safe who are law-abiding citizens. And I think it's a very dangerous path to take between over legislating to the point where good people are in prison for bad reasons, as we've seen with nonviolent drug offenses in the past, and minimum sentencing and all of that. You also have to be careful not to go too far in this sort of lenient way where people go to jail, come out, and then commit a crime 2, 3, 4, 5 days afterwards and end up back in jail.
So some have suggested that we return to days of mandatory minimum sentences and things like that. Others have said that has participated in the overpopulation of certain groups within the criminal justice system and so forth. I guess, where do you fall on that question of mandatory minimums for specific violent repeat offenders? It's an issue that's being raised once again within the state. And how is it that we deal with people that just continuously are hurting other people?
I think so. In my travels, I saw a lot of different ways that the world works and that countries and governments deal with criminal offenses, and even smaller things, just traffic stops and all of that. You see it all when you're traveling. And I think that it's very dangerous to put a mandatory minimum on anything. One of the things I really respect about the American legal system is it is a case-by-case basis. You have a chance in front of a court to prove your case in front of a jury of your peers, or you can do pretrial deferment. There's all these different things to get through it. To say mandatory, no matter what, your situation is the same as someone else's situation, I think is to ignore the nuances of human experiences. That being said, if somebody is 4, 5, 6 strikes, you need to treat that case differently, starting in the trial or starting in the way that the judge handles the situation because of the past. You can't ignore the past of somebody's life just because you don't want to put them in a box that they might not fit in.
Okay. Let me move on. This is not as long of an interview as we might like, so I want to try to get through as many issues.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
And
I can give you 1-sentence answers if you want, baby, but all these things are very nuanced.
Whatever you want to say, you're the candidate. So let me ask you this: in Baltimore County and actually across the entire state, but I do know the specifics for Baltimore County. Within the next few weeks, there's going to be a shortage of police officers of up to 300 slots. And so essentially Baltimore County police are going to be completely overwhelmed and understaffed. That is apparently the case in jurisdictions all across the state of Maryland, to the tune of thousands of police officers that we will not have out on the streets. And so I guess the general question to you would be, this is in fact a crisis. What do we do about that issue?
We have to change the way the public sees the police see each other, and the police see themselves. It's not a question that's going to be answered in a year or maybe even in 4 years or 8 years. We have to change the entire way that we view the police as a society. That doesn't solve the problem in the next 3 weeks, right? We have a problem today right now. If there's a National Guard needs to be called in because chaos is ensuing, it's not a great option, but nobody wants to be a police officer. Not nobody. A lot of people don't. The good ones are scared or frustrated with how the public treats them. The bad ones are scared because accountability is coming. And again, we passed that law recently. I think it was passed about municipalities needing to figure out a way to sort of self-mitigate and to investigate issues on the local municipal level. Changing the way that we view the police. And I think it has to do with really rebuilding community and rebuilding trust. And that's not an issue that's going to get solved while we have this issue. It's just going to make the officers who are on the block or on duty more stressed out, but there's really no solution. We as this issue get too far. And so we're too separated on where we need to be.
So I guess since you're running for lieutenant governor, and this seems to be an issue that is headed toward crisis right now, I guess, I think some would like to know, where they're in the community and just want to make sure that if there's a domestic violence incident, that when you call 911, that somebody's
They'll
actually going to
show
come out
up.
to the house.
Yeah.
That when there's violence on the streets, that there's actually police officers that are going to show up and investigate and so forth. It seems like it's an immediate crisis. So in addition to kind of trying to figure out creative ways to build trust between, rebuild trust between certain
What do we do
communities and the
tomorrow?
police, what are the specific issues to make sure that public safety is taken care of in the short term?
Yeah, so one option is asking retired officers or officers who moved to other careers to come back in, not as police officers. The problem is the training and the lack of community involvement, but to come in as community liaison officers who could support the police. But just giving somebody a badge and a gun does not make you an effective law enforcement officer. And so in the short term, it would have to be stretching out to social services, to stretching out to other nonprofits, people who can help with de-escalation or people who can help with sort of community mitigation, nonviolent mitigation. But at the end of the day, you don't want to give a gun and a badge to a random person who says, I think I could do a good job. There's a reason that you have to train to be a police officer. I don't think personally it's a long enough training. In most states, it's 6 months to a year. And I have to have a 4-year degree to film weddings. But I think in the short term, we need to lean on other agencies and nonprofits to help fill that gap. But at the end of the day, I don't think the solution is just deputizing, people in Baltimore who say, oh, I think I could do a good job.
Okay. Let me switch again, because I'm going to try to get to, and I certainly want to get to your favorite topic, which is the environment, before we get out today. Some issues that are of interest to the bar and are big ticket issues are in the area of civil law and civil litigation, which is kind of an area that always has legislation before the General Assembly and kind of putters along with specifics. Let me give you a couple of the biggest ticket issues and just see if you have any thoughts on them. And I'll just give you a bunch of them and see what your thoughts are. Any reform in the area of punitive damages or dram shop law, or any thoughts on comparative or contributory negligence, or the State and Local Tort Claims Act, all kind of big ticket issues within the civil litigation world that have real life consequences for Marylanders. Any thoughts from your ticket on any or all of those type of issues?
So at the end of the day, it comes down to money, right? You can't give somebody back time. You can't give somebody back experiences if they've been wronged. It's money is how we make amends, or prison or jail time for people. And so we really need to think how we get that money, how that money is used. And obviously, if the person wins the case in civil litigation, it goes to them and to their lawyer. But we need to think our platform is very focused on this sort of like rebuilding of the community of the United States. We're running as Democrats, but it's more sort of humanist perspective. So when you're talking about civil litigation, you need to be thinking, well, I need to be thinking, if we win, about how we can support both the judges, juries, lawyers, everybody on making sure that the restitutions are fair and that they make sense. $3.1 million for spilling a hot cup of coffee on your McDonald's, while people who are fighting for justice in domestic abuse or paternity sort of child support or car accident cases, they don't have the chance to get that type of money. They don't have the chance to fight a big corporation. It's people versus people a lot of the time. So it's just focusing really on the justice side of things, which, again, I'm not a lawyer. The Maryland Bar State Association are, so deferring to the best case or sort of best management practices for how to go forward on this, I think, is what I would do.
As a town councilman, I would assume that your local government municipality has, at least an opinion on the issue of comparative negligence, contributory negligence, and how that might affect your town as a defendant, your citizens as plaintiffs or defendants. Also, the State and Local Tort Claims Act, which has been an issue in the General Assembly that has, has had some movement lately. Thoughts from kind of your work on the town council?
Yeah.
How big is the town that you represent, that you're on the council?
Our municipality is 600. I think it was 603 maybe was the last census. We're very small right now. The issues we're dealing with are not this large. This is something that Jerome, my running mate, is more focused on, having worked on the Hill and a lot of peace initiatives and justice initiatives with this. So as a lieutenant governor, I would be deferring to what he says, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how do you determine fault and how do you determine restitution for fault? And I don't know enough on this issue to speak more on that. I'll be totally honest.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you this. One of the candidates that's running for governor
Mhm.
right now is the Secretary of Commerce for the state.
Mhm.
I did hear your running mate speak about, I guess, the economic plan of having a 3-day work week or 4-day work week or something. But
Mhm.
I wanted to dive into what an actual economic plan would look like for your administration, something that actually would be legal and something that would be
Mhm.
done through the legislative. How is it that your ticket would, for example, attract new businesses to the state of
Mhm.
Maryland? Or and
Mhm.
I heard you talk about a living wage law, though that was,
Mhm.
the wage was just increased.
$15 an hour. Yeah.
So I guess in addition to that issue, how would you attract businesses which seem to be moving out to some extent
Mhm.
based on the tax structure in Maryland? What does your ticket look at when you look at
Yeah.
economics?
Sure. And I want to be totally honest with you. Like a bad business in Maryland is bad for Maryland. We need to be attracting not just businesses. There are jobs out there, as everyone can see. Every business is hiring right now, pretty much. But we need to attract businesses that are attractive to our employees and to our citizens. It's not enough that you work a miserable job you hate all the time, that breaks your back, that you never get to see your kids. We want to try and attract businesses who care about the actual employees they're working for. Because if they're just hiring people and grinding them up essentially and spitting them out over and over again, that's not good for Maryland. That might bring us more tax revenue at the end of the day, but our citizens are suffering. So things like B corporations, benefit corporations, we're looking to attract with tax incentives, focusing on businesses that are investing back in the community, that have corporate social responsibility programs. Um, One of the few, I think, big complaints that Democrats had for Larry Hogan is that he let a few businesses leave Maryland that he didn't care about or feel were a right fit. And at the end of the day, we need to think about what's best for our citizens. Maryland is an incredibly wealthy state overall. We can afford to be choosy, especially when there's so many jobs available. We want to attract businesses that will not only be a good fit for our state, but will make it better. And part of this living wage is not just $15 an hour, or not just you don't have to work 60-hour work weeks if you don't want to, but attracting the type of business that will help us achieve this sort of social vision of a Maryland where people go to work because they love it and not go to work because they don't want to starve to death or get kicked out onto the street.
So aside from the kind of the general thought, like I'm trying to
Mhm.
understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
What specific legislation
Sure.
or what specific things and how much do they cost? Like what is exactly that the plan is in order to attract these types of businesses? And I
Sure.
assume just to be clear, your running mate said something about a 3-day work week. I assume that that's not some legislative suggestion. That's just some utopian vision.
No.
I didn't quite understand that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you the short runaround. I'll try and keep it to like 3 or 4 minutes. So guaranteed basic employment. This is sort of like the Civilian Conservation Corps that FDR did, where people are building state projects. We're going to have to do a lot of mitigation for climate change. We can do all sorts of stuff with environmental restoration or with redeveloping abandoned blocks in Baltimore. There's plenty of work for people to do. 32 hours a week, paid employment, either through the state or privately. A transition to a 4-day work week via a time liberty law. So that means if you want to work 4 days a week, your employer legally should not be able to fire you or take action against you. It means more jobs available and more time for your family, which is less pressure on the state. It's more time for your mental health. It's more time for all of this. As we saw with COVID, people want to be outside. They don't want to be at work a lot of the time. So giving you the option, but not in a way that it's forced. So I'm pulling through. We're also interested in helping
Can I
people.
ask you about that actually?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you
Yeah.
a question about that?
Sure.
So I run a small business as a law firm. So
Sure.
you're saying that the Siegel administration would
Hmm.
have a law that says that my paralegals would have the option, and my lawyers would have the option of
Mhm.
only working 32 hours a week, and that would be nothing as the business owner that you would be legally allowed to do with that?
So that's a really good question. I'm also a small business owner. I run a video studio. I have 2 to 4 employees. I can't handle that. You can't handle that. We're looking at setting a minimum employee limit of either 50 or 35 employees at your business. So we're talking people who have HR, who have the ability to have like sort of part-time employees, all that. We're not trying to screw small businesses over, the people who are working in your town at the ice cream shop who need high school kids working. We're talking large businesses who have the ability to give people more of their time back, but also not screwing over people like myself or like your law firm. So minimum 50 employee or maybe 35 employee limit for that law to take effect.
The obviously the court the Supreme Court had a monumental decision in overturning Roe v.
Mhm,
Wade. In Maryland,
mhm.
abortion rights are already protected under the law and under a referendum that was done some 30 years ago. So that's not an issue here in the state of Maryland, although there will be bills, I'm sure, about that. I wanted to ask a question about the other case that happened just a few days before Roe v. Wade, which had to do with the overturning of the New York statute, and which had to do with essentially the permits to carry guns. Maryland and a few other states, but certainly Maryland, has a law on the books that is very similar to the one that was overturned by New York. And so I guess it leaves the question as to what is it that Maryland should do about that right now? Are there specific ways to address that specific issue about, what was the handgun roster review board and then the administrative law judges and how that whole process with carrying guns work? Do you have any thoughts about that particular issue? Because that is an issue that will hit the General Assembly this year.
This is one of the scariest things about a representative democracy, is that it made it to the Supreme Court. All the sort of circuit, all of the courts to get to that point, and the Supreme Court voted, I think it was like 6-3. And that law has been in effect since 1911 in New York. Like, this is not an assault rifle thing. This is a law that's been in there for a long time, and the Supreme Court was able to come in and change it. And I think as Marylanders, we have to, if it goes to the Supreme Court in Maryland as well, and they use similar arguments, we're not gonna, like, it's the Supreme Court. We're gonna have to focus on education campaigns for people in our state to where that doesn't get to that point, to where gun rights groups are sitting across the table from Moms Against Guns, and they're having a conversation to where we don't need the Supreme Court to dictate this for us. Because if we get to the Supreme Court as progressives, we will lose. It happened in New York, it could happen here.
So let me just ask it a different way. The Supreme
Mhm,
Court's decision about the New York law
mhm.
obliterates Maryland's law without another
Already,
case.
yeah.
Maryland's law is now per se unconstitutional. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, there's nuances to it. So assuming
And you
that's
have to
true,
fight those nuances if you want.
arguendo, what does
Mhm,
Maryland's new kind of law look like? I mean, assuming as I think I do with you that you're
mhm,
not interested in having everybody have a right to carry in the state,
mhm,
that is
mhm.
essentially what the Supreme Court has done. A little bit
Because they had to have
basic,
proper
but
cause to have it outside their home, right? So you don't need proper cause anymore, which means you can bring a gun to Walmart
that's right.
or
Uh,
wherever.
right. In Maryland, as you know, you have to provide a reason. That's what the
Mhm,
Supreme Court overturned with the New
yeah.
York case. And so Maryland is left a little bit in a lurch as to what to do. And I guess my
Mhm.
question to you is specifically, do you have any ideas as to what the new statute should look like in Maryland, since the old one was
Mhm.
just obliterated by the Supreme Court?
So you can't, I mean, you can, but it will be an incredibly difficult and probably violent process to take guns away from people who have gone through the steps. So you would have to regulate more effectively how people get a gun, the processes and background checks, because the federal registry, I think they prosecuted like 1 or 2 cases in the last 10 years of people who applied for guns who shouldn't have, and were denied. So you have to regulate how guns get into people's hands and how guns are sold private citizen to private citizen or at gun shows and stuff like that. Because if someone has the right to carry and they have a gun, the Supreme Court said it, the right to carry, you can't fight that anymore unless you have something else, something different, new evidence. And so we could maybe take that saying on the sale side, on the ammunition sale side, there are other ways to sort of keep guns out of scary people's hands. But at the end of the day, if a law-abiding citizen carrying a gun wants to go to a store, it'll have to be up to that private business, your law firm or my video business, or, you know, the grocery store down the street, whether or not they allow guns in it, which will make the whole thing even more complicated and chaotic and frustrating for people than it already is.
Okay, not an easy topic.
It's not, and
so-
there's no quick solution, unfortunately, because we've had how many school shootings in the last 10 years and are just now this week making a federal change.
So, Justinian, let me ask Lieutenant, sorry,
Mhm.
I apologize for using your first name, Mr. Dispenza.
I'm a
we
pretty
have
chill
run,
guy.
unfortunately, with all the starts and stops, run out of time. I'm getting the high
Mhm.
sign. So let me just ask you one last question. It's kind of an open-ended
Sure.
question, specifically for the
Mhm.
Bar Association. The role
Sure.
of lawyers in government.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about how MSBA in particular, with its tens of thousands of legal professionals across the state, can best help serve the state of Maryland and its governmental functions?
It comes down to justice, and justice changes over time, unfortunately. What was just in 1860s America is different from today. And so it's the Bar Association keeping up to date with the needs of Marylanders, the values of Marylanders, the fears and passions, and working to create a more just world, both in the legislature and in civil litigation, as you mentioned earlier. We don't know the laws, and not all, just because it's a law doesn't necessarily mean it's a just law. If you look back in our history, there are plenty of laws that were unjust that seemed just at the time. So it's continuing to be not progressive in terms of liberal or conservative, but progressive in terms of human rights, in terms of values of the people, in terms of people of color, minorities, people who are not in positions of power, and just keeping the law system equitable for all. I think it's one of the greatest things about the United States is that we have a democracy, but democracies are messy. It takes time to push forward through issues, as we're seeing now with gun legislation or climate change or anything. And I think the best thing that the Maryland Bar Association can do is stick to what they think is the most just, the most ethical, the most equitable, and help us as elected officials to create laws to protect our citizens, because the role of myself as lieutenant governor is largely ceremonial, right? But as Jerome Siegel as governor, he will need to work, and I'm sure he will, on making sure that Marylanders live in a just society where the laws that are made are meant to protect and save and care for them as citizens.
Okay. Justinian Dispenza, candidate for Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for your time this morning, and the best of luck to you. And we look forward to hearing more from you. On behalf
Thank you
of
very
the
much,
Maryland
Senator
State
Zirkin.
Bar, yep, good to see you. And on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association, we thank you so much for this interview this morning, and look forward to the next one. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.